There are doors in this world that were meant to stay closed, not because of what lies behind them, but because of what closing them meant to those who turned the key one final time. Some doors hold secrets, others hold shame, and a few, just a few, hold both, locked away like a photograph you dare not look at, yet too important to destroy. This is the story of one such door, a door that remained locked for 60 years on a plantation in Louisiana, its key lost to time, its purpose forgotten by all but one. When it was finally opened on a humid September morning in 1927, what was inside was neither treasure nor bodies, nor forbidden letters. What was found was far more haunting, a room frozen in time, as if life itself had stopped mid-sentence, a place where every object seemed to hold its breath. To understand the significance of that room, we must go back to when the door was open, when the Bowmont plantation on Bayou Sorrel Road still breathed with life, and when its halls were filled with both hope and despair. Back to April of 1865, when the world as they knew it was ending and beginning all at once. The Bowmont plantation sat like a wounded cathedral along the banks of the bayou. From the river, you could see the house rising through cypress trees, white columns leaning slightly east, wide galleries with missing boards, tall windows reflecting the water like tired eyes. The paint was peeling, the gardens had gone wild, and trumpet vines crawled over the pillars, as if trying to pull the entire structure back into the earth. War had left its mark on Louisiana, and the Bowmont family had felt it deeper than most. Charles Bowmont returned from the conflict in March of 1865, 2 weeks before General Lee's surrender at Appomattox. He left as a major, leading men he had known since childhood, into battles whose names he refused to speak. He returned as just Charles. No rank, no glory, no illusions left. 41 years old, his hair nearly gray, his posture rigid, as if he held himself upright through sheer force of will. He had lost weight, his uniform hung loose, and when he took it off that first night, his wife Margaret noticed the tremor in his hands as he unbuttoned it. They had been married for 19 years. Margaret could read him like a storm barometer, and that night she saw that the man who had left in 1861 had not truly returned. Someone else wore his face. And the house, the fields, the family, they would all have to learn how to live with the ghost of the man who came back.
The 43 souls who remained on the Bowmont plantation after emancipation stayed for reasons that were never simple. Some, like Sarah Hewitt, had nowhere else to go. 62 years old, born in the quarters, her arthritic joints made travel impossible. Freedom had been given, but without resources, freedom was just another cage. She stayed because at least she knew the land she had walked her entire life. Others remained because their families were buried in the fields beyond the live oaks, generations resting under wooden crosses and stones. James Pewitt, for instance, could not abandon the graves of his wife and children, taken by fever in 1859. A few stayed for wages that were promised and sometimes delivered. Moses Durant was one of these. 28, compact, watchful, intelligent. His hands were a map of labor, scars from tobacco and indigo work, burns from vats, a missing piece of his left thumb. Born on the property, as was his father before him, Moses had learned to read in secret, taught by a traveling minister who left a Bible filled with notes in the margins. After emancipation, Charles Bowmont offered him the position of foreman, a role that put him between two worlds. Trusted by neither the workers nor the family, yet given access to the main house, to information, and to leverage. And Moses had learned that information was the only currency that could never be devalued by war. The plantation was a microcosm of tension and hierarchy. Most people existed in the shadows of history, while one person floated above all of them, seemingly untouchable. Amelie Lauron lived on the third floor of the main house, accessible only by a narrow servant staircase. Her eyes were gray, like river fog, and they seemed to peer straight into the soul. She rarely descended. At first, she would join the family for dinner, sitting like a portrait, silent and still, a ghost in the room. By 1864, those appearances stopped entirely. Delaline Carter, a house servant, had taken over the task of bringing Emily her meals. 43, thin, eyes sharp, and a mouth that knew when to remain silent. Delaline understood the rhythms of the house, the creaking floorboards, the swelling doors, the hiding places of whiskey and valuables. She watched over Emily as if protecting a fragile secret, delivering trays with practiced precision, taking only 5 seconds to pass the threshold before the door was locked again, curtains drawn always, even in the daylight. No one knew what Emily did behind that locked door. Sometimes Delaline would hear her talking to herself, in French, occasionally in English, asking questions and answering them as if conversing with someone unseen. Once, Delaline heard her sobbing, whispering over and over, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Hundreds of repetitions, heartbreak captured in the confines of that locked room. Moses catalogued these observations with quiet care, knowing that in a world built on secrets, knowledge was survival. This house, this plantation, this locked room, it was more than architecture. It was a witness. And within its walls, the truth waited, patient, silent, and preserved, waiting for the day someone brave enough would uncover it.
Despite her seclusion, Emily's presence was felt everywhere in the house. No one could claim to truly know her. Her footsteps were measured, precise, almost ghost-like. And then one day, the unimaginable happened. A ledger, a record from Charles Bowmont's study, went missing. Suspicion rippled quietly through the household, whispered in the hallways, observed by those who dared to notice. Charles Bowmont confronted Emily, knocking on her third-floor door, demanding answers. "I need to speak with you," he said, the oak reverberating under his knocks. "The ledger contains sensitive information about the plantation. If you took it, return it." Silence answered him. Emily's voice, quiet but unwavering, finally came from the other side. "I haven't taken anything. You will have to find it yourself." That one word, flat, absolute, unyielding, halted Charles in his tracks. He had authority, yet here was a person who refused to obey, who refused to open the door. The ledger, after 3 days, reappeared in the library, tucked between 2 books. Charles swore he had checked that exact spot. And upstairs, in her locked room, Emily sat in the lamplight, still writing, still observing, still recording. But the real discovery came to Moses Durant one July morning while walking the boundaries of the property. The old overseer's cottage, abandoned for years, seemed ordinary at first, but the door was slightly ajar. His instincts told him something had changed. Inside, the cottage smelled of mildew and old tobacco. Dust lay thick, yet footprints were visible, small, neat, deliberate, and not his own. The tracks led to the center of the room, stopping near a loose floorboard. Carefully, Moses pried it open and found an oilcloth bundle. He lifted it with trembling hands, heavier than expected. Inside were papers, dozens, perhaps hundreds. Letters, journal pages, copied ledgers, all carefully organized and tied with string. Moses didn't read them at the cottage. Something about the weight of their truth demanded privacy and safety. He rewrapped the bundle, replaced the floorboard, and carried it to his own quarters. That night, by candlelight, he finally began to read. The first section contained letters addressed to Lieutenant Marcus Graves of the Union Army, signed with initials AL. They detailed troop movements, supply caches, and Confederate sympathizers, intelligence carefully gathered by Emily during the war. She had watched, listened, recorded every detail of what her neighbors would consider treasonous. The letters spanned from 1862 to early 1865, a meticulous record of bravery, danger, and risk. Moses's heart raced. The realization struck him. She had been spying, collecting secrets, putting herself in danger for the truth. The second section was far more personal. Journal pages chronicled daily operations on the plantation in ways official ledgers never could. Charles Bowmont's secret transactions, enslaved people sold to cover debts, trades hidden from sight, all documented. One entry read, Philip Durant and his brother Marcus were sold to a broker from Natchez in September 1863. Moses believes his father ran away. He must continue to believe this. The truth would serve no purpose but to create pain. Moses could hardly breathe. The world he knew was layered with lies, and Emily had preserved the truth for all to see, if only someone brave enough could uncover it. The candle flickered, shadows danced across the walls, and Moses felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. This was not just information. It was history, stolen and hidden, waiting for justice, waiting for remembrance. The third section of the documents revealed something Moses had not expected. A list,
43 names, carefully recorded in alphabetical order, each name marked with notes: sold, died, retained on property, current location unknown. The names he knew, the faces he had seen, the people who had worked alongside him, whose lives had been hidden behind the walls of this plantation. People who had been reduced to line items in a ledger of deaths and survival. Philip Durant, Marcus Durant, Sarah Hewitt, James Pewitt, Delaney Carter. Each name carried a history, compressed into a few words, yet hinting at lifetimes of struggle, fear, and endurance. Some had been sold to brokers in Natchez to pay Charles Bowmont's debts. Others remained on the property, trapped in a freedom that had no meaning without resources. And at the bottom, in Amelie's careful handwriting, a note: "These are the people whose lives were controlled by the Bowmont family during the period of enslavement. I record their names so they will not be forgotten. Not property, not numbers, people, families, stories. Their truth must outlive our lives." Moses sat in the flickering candlelight, the weight of history pressing on him. The truth was dangerous. If Charles Bowmont knew these documents existed, he would destroy them. Other plantation owners would burn them. The secrets of generations were preserved only because Amelie had risked everything to record them. And now, the question that burned through Moses's mind was simple. What should he do with them? He could leave them hidden, locked away beneath the floorboards of his cabin, safe from immediate danger, but inaccessible to the world. Or he could act, protect the legacy of these people, and ensure that their stories, their names, and their suffering would not be lost to time. The candle flickered as he turned the pages, reading the individual stories of families torn apart, lives stolen, and yet somehow surviving. Each line was a whisper from the past, a testament to resilience, endurance, and the moral failure of those in power. The documents revealed more than just crimes. They revealed the humanity of those enslaved, the small acts of courage, the quiet endurance of individuals who had survived unimaginable cruelty. Amelie's records were not just ledgers, they were monuments of memory. Moses realized that holding these papers was more than a responsibility. It was a moral imperative. He had become the keeper of a truth the world had tried to bury. That night, Moses made a decision. He would protect the documents, every letter, every ledger entry, every name. They were too important to leave hidden. They were the voice of those silenced, the evidence of lives reduced to numbers, and the proof that history, no matter how carefully erased, always finds a way to speak. And so, Moses Durant became the guardian of this hidden history, knowing that the consequences of discovery could be severe, but also knowing that some truths were worth risking everything for. In the quiet of his cabin, candlelight casting long shadows, he began to plan. Copies would be made, hiding places secured. The truth would be preserved, even if he alone carried the burden. And far above him, in the locked room on the third floor, Amelie continued her work, unaware that someone had finally discovered the fruits of her decades of courage. Moses couldn't sleep that night. The weight of the documents pressed on him like the humid Louisiana air, heavy and suffocating. Every name, every transaction, every hidden ledger entry reminded him of the lives that had been controlled, traded, and erased. But the more he read, the more he realized the truth was fragile. One mistake, one discovery by Charles Bowmont, and it could all be lost. The following evening, Moses decided to confront the reality of the situation. He had to speak with Amelie, the woman who had risked everything to record these truths. But Desaline warned him, "She don't let nobody in that room, not even me." The third-floor servant staircase was narrow, dark, and unforgiving. Every step creaked beneath his weight as he climbed toward the room where secrets had lived for decades. 3 steps, silence. 2 steps, groan. 10 steps total. The hallway was pitch black except for a thin line of light under Emily's door. He knocked softly, then waited. "Miss Emily," Desaline said quietly, "there's someone here wants to speak with you." A pause. The muffled voice of Emily asked, "Who?" "Moses Durant," came the reply. Movement inside. The scrape of furniture, a chair being pulled back, footsteps approaching. The door remained closed, the barrier between them thick with history and fear. "I found your documents," Moses said finally, "the ones hidden in the overseer's cottage. I read them." absolute silence. The tension was palpable, a heavy presence pressing against the walls of the third-floor hallway. Then Emily spoke, her voice quiet, almost resigned. "How did you find them?" "I noticed the door was open," Moses replied. "The floorboard was loose. I meant to come back for them." She sat down on the other side of the door, mirroring his position. "I must have forgotten about that bundle," she whispered. "I've been preparing, gathering everything together, because I know what's coming." Charles suspected her. He had been watching, pretending not to notice, but she knew. He would eventually try to enter her room, to seize control, to destroy the evidence she had meticulously preserved. And if he did, the documents, her life's work, would vanish. Moses realized the stakes. They weren't just guarding paper, they were guarding history itself. And so they began to plan. Copies would be made, hidden in separate locations, impossible to trace back to her. But there was another risk. To protect these documents, Moses would become a target. Anyone could come after him. Yet he didn't hesitate. The names, the stories, the truths of families stolen and sold demanded courage. He looked at Emily through the closed door, speaking softly. "I'll protect all of it. Your father's story, everyone's story. It will be safe." She nodded slowly. The weight of that nod carried decades of secrecy, fear, and the unyielding determination to ensure history remembered what others had tried to erase. They worked through the night. Emily selected the most critical documents, the letters that revealed espionage, the ledgers that exposed hidden transactions, and the journal entries that recorded the lives of 43 people, once enslaved, now finally given a voice. Every copy made, every hiding place secured was a promise that their truth would survive, even if the world tried to forget. And outside, the shadows of the plantation stretched long across the land, the quiet tension of a house full of secrets humming like a heartbeat in the still night.
The days on the Bowmont plantation carried on with an uneasy rhythm. Outwardly, life seemed almost normal. The fields were tended, the indigo processed, repairs made to the aging structures. But behind closed doors, a quiet war was being waged, a battle of secrets, memory, and survival. Moses moved carefully, aware that at any moment, Charles Bowmont could uncover the truth hiding in the shadows. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every step on the creaking floors of the plantation house carried weight. Moses was no longer just a worker. He had become a guardian, a keeper of history. The documents he had discovered were more than paper. They were evidence of human lives, of moral failure, and of courage hidden in the corners of a world built on cruelty. Emily's meticulous recordings had captured years of suffering, yet also resilience. And now, those records rested in Moses's hands, fragile, priceless, and dangerous. Each morning, he checked the hiding places, ensuring that the oilcloth bundles remained untouched, undisturbed. Every evening, he ascended the narrow servant staircase, quietly listening for any sign that Emily's sanctuary had been breached. Outside, the wind whispered through the cypress trees, carrying with it the echoes of a history too often ignored. The Bowmonts continued their routines, oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind, to the storm of truth building quietly in the shadows. Moses thought often of the 43 names, of the people whose lives had been reduced to ledger entries, whose stories had been hidden in the margins of history. Philip and Marcus Durant sold to pay debts, Sarah Hewitt trapped by age and infirmity, James Pewitt grieving the loss of family. Each life, recorded with care, became a responsibility he could not shirk. And yet, the more he read, the more he understood the danger. If Charles discovered even a single page, the consequences could be catastrophic, not just for Moses and Emily, but for the truth itself. Emily, meanwhile, continued her work in the locked room, the hours stretching into nights. She had become a ghost in her own home, moving silently between the shadows of memory and the demands of survival. The ledger, the letters, the journals, they were her legacy, and she would not allow them to be destroyed. Every action, every precaution was calculated. And Moses, standing outside the door, was no longer merely an observer. He was a participant in the preservation of history. But the tension was relentless. Each creak of a floorboard, each unexpected footstep, each glance from Charles was a reminder that the secrets they protected could be uncovered at any moment.
Moses moved with careful precision, never underestimating the lengths to which some would go to hide or erase the truth. And in the quiet hours, he reflected on the weight of his responsibility. These documents were more than evidence. They were voices, alive in ink, demanding that the world remember what had been done. The plantation seemed to hold its breath. Shadows stretched across the walls, the sun dipped below the horizon, and Moses prepared for another night of vigilance. He understood that this was no ordinary struggle. History itself hung in the balance. And as the candle flickered, he made a silent vow that the truth, once hidden, would survive, no matter the cost.
Weeks passed, and the tension on the Bowmont plantation reached a breaking point. Charles Bowmont, ever vigilant, had begun noticing inconsistencies. Ledgers misplaced, documents slightly altered, subtle hints that someone had been moving through his carefully maintained order. His suspicion grew, like a storm cloud hovering over the estate, ready to burst at the slightest provocation. Moses continued his routine, each day walking a tightrope between duty and secrecy. He checked hiding places, ensured the copies were secure, and avoided drawing attention. Emily, meanwhile, remained confined to her room on the 3rd floor, her sanctuary both a prison and a fortress. Every creak of the floorboards, every glance at the hallway beneath her door, reminded her that discovery could come at any moment. She had risked everything for these documents, and she would not fail now. One humid afternoon, Moses noticed Charles lingering near the main house study. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room, lingering on the ledger where the missing entries had once been recorded. Moses's pulse quickened. He realized that the time for subtlety was fading. Charles was growing closer, circling the truth with an instinct sharpened by decades of power and control. One wrong move, one slip, and everything could be lost. That evening, Moses returned to Emily's room. He knocked softly, the candle flickering beside him, shadows dancing across the walls. "Miss Emily," he whispered, "he's getting closer. We must be ready." Emily's gray eyes met his through the darkness. There was a calm, unyielding determination there that Moses had come to rely on. "We will be ready," she said quietly. "I've hidden the most important copies where no one will find them. And if he comes, the rest will go to the world, to newspapers, to anyone who will listen." Moses felt the gravity of her words. The stakes had never been higher. The documents, filled with the stories of 43 people whose lives had been controlled, traded, and hidden, were not just evidence, they were justice, memory, and truth, preserved against the erasure imposed by time and privilege. And now, that truth was about to collide with the man who had tried to bury it. Days later, Charles made his move. He approached the 3rd floor door, his hand reaching for the handle, the air thick with expectation. Moses watched from below, heart pounding, as the lock clicked under Charles' fingers. But when the door swung open, it revealed not destruction, but empty space, the documents gone, secured elsewhere, beyond his reach. Rage and disbelief flashed across Charles' face. He had been outmaneuvered, outwitted, and the truth remained intact. Moses and Emily exhaled, their shoulders sagging with the weight of what had just passed. They had preserved history, protected lives, and ensured that the stories of those who had suffered under the Bowmonts would not be forgotten. In that moment, the room, once a silent witness to decades of secrets, became a monument to courage, vigilance, and the power of truth. The plantation remained, with its peeling paint and leaning columns, a reminder of a world built on control and secrecy. But within the walls, a small victory had been won. The ledger, the letters, the journal entries, all carefully preserved, would survive. And through them, the voices of those 43 people, once silenced, would finally be heard. The Bowmont plantation stood quietly in the fading light, its white columns leaning, gardens overgrown, and walls whispering the echoes of a past that few dared to remember. Life continued, as it always had, but for Moses and Emily, the world had shifted. They had safeguarded more than papers. They had preserved truth, memory,
and dignity for the lives that had been reduced to numbers in a ledger for decades. Moses returned to his quarters, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders, yet tempered by a deep sense of purpose. He thought of Philip Durant, Marcus, Sarah Hewitt, James Pewitt, Deline Carter, and all the others whose names Amelie had painstakingly recorded. Each one of them had a story that had been denied, erased, or hidden. Now, through these documents, those stories would live on. The ledger was no longer just a collection of names and transactions. It was a testament to resilience, a refusal to allow the world to forget the humanity that had been denied for so long. Amelie, in her room above, finally allowed herself a rare moment of calm. The candlelight flickered across her journals and letters, illuminating pages that had witnessed decades of injustice, fear, and courage. She understood that the world outside would never fully grasp the magnitude of what had occurred here, but that did not matter. The truth was safe, and that was enough. The locked room, once a symbol of secrecy and confinement, had become a sanctuary of history, of memory, and of moral reckoning. Outside, the plantation seemed to exhale, the wind rustling through the cypress trees as if acknowledging the invisible victory within. The people who had lived and worked there, whose lives had been hidden behind layers of power and privilege, were finally recognized, not through monuments or ceremonies, but through the written word, preserved against the erasure of time. Amelie had risked everything to ensure that these voices, once silenced, would endure. And yet, the story of the locked room was not merely about the past. It was about the choices that define us, about courage in the face of power, and the responsibility each person carries when confronted with truth. Moses understood that. Every careful step, every night spent in vigilance, had been a tribute to justice. He had become part of a legacy far greater than himself, an unseen guardian of history, ensuring that the truth could never be hidden again. Decades later, when the door to the room was finally opened, long after the plantation had changed hands, and time had blurred the lines between past and present, the evidence within spoke for itself. Letters, ledgers, and journals told stories that no history book would dare fully capture. They revealed the hidden lives of 43 individuals and countless others whose experiences had been erased from public memory. And in that revelation, the moral of the story remained clear. The truth, no matter how uncomfortable, has the power to endure. The locked room, once a symbol of fear and secrecy, had become a monument to courage, integrity, and memory. And as the sun set over the overgrown gardens and peeling columns, one thing was certain. The lives recorded within those pages, the stories of suffering, resilience, and survival, would never again be forgotten. In the end, history does not belong to those who hold power. It belongs to those who remember, who bear witness, and who preserve the truth for generations yet to come.